as well. We now recognize Chairman Williams from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And Ms. Bressler, I'm a small business owner back in Texas, like you are, and you used some words today that the federal government doesn't understand, okay? It's called easier, faster, and incentivized. They don't get that, okay? They only hear it from the private sector. So the Department of Defense SBR program often lacks instructions for small businesses to follow. You've said that, and I agree with you. We've heard from many frustrated small business owners who have left with more questions than answers about the requirements and what would be needed for follow-up on contracts, when to apply for the SBR program, or even which DoD innovation initiative actually they should use. So this causes many small businesses, as you talked about, to walk away from the defense market and not participate in the program because they do not have a clear picture of what the full investment will be and cannot justify navigating the complicated regulations. So simply, how can this concern be addressed, and how widespread is the issue?
Thank you for the question. So I think the easiest way to assess this would be trying to go through this process yourself, having as many people who are involved in designing the process actually go through it and make notes. I think relative to some of the complex technological challenges that the Department of Defense tackles on a daily basis, this is relatively simple, but the cultural piece is significant. And you would need to look at not only creating the appropriate systems, policies, having the right tools, but also requiring that new steps be taken, requiring certain metrics to be tracked. So even this notion of how many new businesses are working in the SBIR program every year, the reason you can hear different numbers is because there isn't a standard way in which they track that, for instance.
Mr. Valletta, your testimony indicated that several hurdles remain to make the SBIC program cumbersome, including the limitation definition of legible capital, which could be broadened and made clearer. What would you recommend we do on this committee to fix this particular issue?
Actually, thank you for that question, Chairman. We really look for the SBIC program to be expanded from that leverageable capital with using the venture investment development organizations like ourselves to be able to use that capital, the returns that we receive from programs, various programs from state and local and federal, to be able to get that velocity of investments from organizations. And then on the SBIR and STTR type of programs, leveraging those organizations to make it clear, as Ms. Bressler mentioned, in regards to maybe using an IPART program, those innovation partnerships like we have in our program at Ben Franklin, to make the process easier, and to note that we have a 28% success rate versus the national average of 18%. So I think all those things combined make it easier for the communities that we serve to refresh, retain, and reimagine jobs for our great country.
Thank you. Mr. Palmer. Our government spending is currently on an unsustainable path, in case you were not aware of that.
I'm aware of that.
Okay.
Yes.
Overspending poured gasoline on the inflation fire every single day. Every American is currently experiencing these high interest rates for and they're going to be decade-long. Simply, how does the current economic climate affect the performance and viability of the SBICs?
The SBIC, the demand for SBIC capital is extremely strong because the banks have had to pull back. The banks are, particularly the smaller and regional banks, are struggling with still loss of deposits. That's a challenge. And the businesses that have floating rate loans, their costs have gone up significantly. So I was talking to a fund manager the other day. They had a business that was growing at 40% a year, just rocking and rolling. They're down to 5% growth. Just changes entirely on interest rates, just the cost of borrowing capital to grow, and that's hard. But inflation is difficult on consumers, and it's difficult on businesses to plan, and it's a challenge.
Real quick, with time I got going, as a follow-up, I always look at when evaluating any government program or anything is a return on investment, which they don't understand about here in Washington. But for those people that may not be familiar with the SBIC program, can you tell us quickly, if any taxpayer dollars have been lost, and what would have to occur the federal funds to be wiped out in this program?
Sure, excellent question. So it's a zero subsidy program, so by law, it cannot. We have to, they charge additional fees on top of it. There are hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $1 billion to the positive, as far as excess fees versus losses that are there. But the key to the program that makes it work and be taxpayer protection is that the private capital has to be lost first before the taxpayer is exposed. And frankly, I think that should be true for just about any government program that's existing, because you should have your own money at risk before anybody gets exposed.
I now recognize